I don't perceive that what happened with MF Global was really, a surveillance or, transactions that were traded improperly. And so, that's sort of a different situation. So in that, I wouldn't say that would be a failure of global regulation. I mean, that would be basically that something should be mandated by the home jurisdiction in that case.
Yeah, but if you look at things like Dodd-Frank Act, there's clearly implications on ensuring stability with major market participants. And the failure of MF Global is having ripples all over the place, from Australia to Chicago. So it's important, but it doesn't seem to hang anywhere.
Actually, there was a compliance and surveillance failure there because Craig mentioned it yesterday. In the US, it's mandated that you segregate your client and house funds, and there seems to be some question about commingling of that for whatever reason it was for. So, in fact, under the surveillance and compliance regime there, any commingling like that should have been picked up pretty quickly, even though through the regular reporting mechanism to the CTC alone, let alone the SRO responsibility exchange. So, I think.
Absolutely, I think that, and it's outrageous actually. That is the most straightforward problem. If they really had been mixing their funds in that way, that's an outrageous problem, regulatory problem. And that, I think regulation has a duty to protect clients from that kind of issue. It does not, I think, have a duty to keep MF Global in business. Yeah. And there's two different things. If MF Global went out of business because they were proprietary trading and they made a wrong bet, they should go out of business and they should be closed down in as you were saying, without causing huge ripples. But the important thing there is that their clients, the clients for whom they were brokers, should not lose out as a result of them playing with their own money.
Let's suppose they were contributing 50% of the liquidity, platinum or something, of the metals exchange. But what we've got here is something happening on the other world, destroying the market in a different place.
But I mean, they would have been contributing that liquidity partly through the business of their clients and partly potentially through their own money. Probably mostly through the business of their clients, because their proprietary business is relatively new. That business is going to come back. Those clients are going to move. They're going to go use a different broker. So I don't think I don't think it's a temporary hiccup. But if that was the only problem, I don't think it's a problem that we should be too scared about.
Any more questions? Oh, sorry, Alexander. Sorry.
I think it just emphasises the need for two things. One is to ensure that entities like MF Global, which are a financial institution but not a conventional one, you could say, make sure that the regulatory framework for institutions like that is properly undertaken. And secondly, on a global basis, to ensure that you've got the adequate sort of cooperation between authorities, whether it's in the United States and Europe and so on. I think they've been rather good in some of the European legislations of sort of beefing up the cross-border regulation and supervision of entities, whether they're banks, and we're going to get this for infrastructures as well, investment firms obviously through MiFID. But maybe there is a need in some cases to ensure that not just non-conventional entities, but actually also non-conventional products, and we get this with shadow banking as well, to make sure that all those are included somewhere along the regulatory kaleidoscope. And I think that's the challenge for the authorities going forward.
Huge sympathy for the regulators, both here and in the United States, because with what's happened with the financial crisis, it used to be that regulators focused primarily on consumer protection and safety and soundness of the institutions. And now with all the focus on the systemic implications, there has been sort of an idea with each regulator in each jurisdiction that they also, under their bailiwick, have responsibility for the entire financial system. And that's why I think that you're seeing that the regulations have been so broad and much broader in terms of their extraterritorial reach. And from the mandate, I have a huge sympathy with why they need to be so broad, because if you're trying to take under control that an institution's activities here, if they're dealing with an institution in your own jurisdiction, it could have a significant impact. And I think the ultimate way and the path, which was gaining kind of stead back in 2007, is the whole principle of mutual recognition. Clearly a lot more has to be done, and that was, with the SEC in the United States reaching great headway with Australia, but unfortunately the timing right after that, that's when the financial markets fell apart. And I think there's a little bit of regulatory standoff between the jurisdictions as to which one is going to be the first one to really embrace mutual recognition of another jurisdiction and what it means. I mean, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission probably is the most up to speed on that in what they used to have for their exemptive relief for foreign boards of trade. They do have very general principles of what mutual recognition would look like, and that's also been codified in Dodd-Frank in terms of the registration process now for foreign boards of trade. But it's quite interesting. I attended a regulatory meeting of the CFTC and some other US regulators, and someone asked them point blank, what do you think about mutual recognition? And they pretty much said, well, we don't really want to do it. And this is staff, it's not the view of the commission, et cetera. But the staff pretty much said, well, we don't want to start putting it out there until some other regulatory jurisdiction has offered us mutual recognition. So in other words, there's some sort of a standoff perhaps in terms of wanting to see what the flexibility in each jurisdiction would be before being the first one to lay out the ground rules. But I think all the steps are there in place because I mean, we're talking about too much regulatory information, right? If you're getting every single report on every single institution around the world and its branches and subsidiaries, it kind of reminds me when I replaced the head of a trading desk from one institution to another. And at the end of the day, my first few days there, they're bringing me a stack about this big on what my portfolio is doing. And kind of after everybody would leave, I kind of go, because the reports were meaningless to me until the time in the education process. And I think similarly, if you're starting from a point of view where you're getting way too much information, you're never even going to get to that point where you feel comfortable and can use the information you're given.
If you take a situation where you are attempting to monitor a very simple manipulative act, let's say that somebody's particular firm is placing orders and not really participating in any trades, just simply placing orders and then cancelling them. So first couple of times, let's assume that this is just 20 orders within the last 10 seconds, or again order to trade ratio of sorts as well. And if they don't comply, what that means is that the firm would be notified saying that you placed 20 orders during the last 20 seconds and you didn't participate in any trade, and therefore you're going to be penalized. What that means is the firm can turn back and say, okay, if it is 20 orders, I will always put 23 and not 19 orders, and therefore I will not be caught in your rules. So a firm, or whoever that is, can, as long as they know the parameters to play around with, can always come very close to tripping the wire, but not trip it, and therefore they will not be identified. So I think surveillance systems of sorts in today's day and age really need to take into account the trading patterns, identify anomalies, just like what was told, not only go by a set of rules or set of parameters that you may have set to identify manipulative behavior.
There are CEOs responsible for the confidence in their company. And then the regulator should be the one who is going to produce the confidence for the company. That seems a bit strange to me, because I'm used to talk to people in Germany, for example, who very, very much know they are responsible for their for their company and for their compliance and their market surveillance. And there is a point decentralized where all the knowledge about all the business one company does is centralized. I do not believe the regulator can ever know everything about the business of a company that is doing business all around the world. The task of the regulator is different to the task of a market surveillance and a compliance officer. And therefore, I believe a lot of this work has to be done within the companies that are playing in the market and that who want to be confident and compliant.
So like ask the panel each individually to sum up in terms of whether they're optimistic in terms of whether the efforts being put in place now are going to be enough to stop the market abuse and other forms of abuse, or whether we'll never know enough, that we're always going to be, fighting the last war 10 years behind. Wolfgang.
I'm always optimistic, but I'm quite sure it will not be the last war. It will go on, and we have to try to stay on the second place in the race. There will others be on the first.
Peter.
I think the more detailed aspects of most of this legislation will have virtually no effect on abuse. I think there are some general things which the regulation does to, for instance, create more information for clients and for regulators in the OTC derivatives field, which actually is a good and can be used for managing the markets properly. But a lot of the stuff that's being talked about at the moment is tinkering at the edges.
Carmen?
In terms of the regulatory reform, for OTC derivatives, I think that's what happened is that what the regulators in the United States perceived as some sort of market failure or abuses will be being addressed, but I don't agree that there were these sorts of occurrences. I mean, it was a fairly opaque market, but it was a lot more transparent that the regulators gave it credit for. There were screens detailing interest rate swaps, et cetera, that you could look up on Bloomberg. So, but in that sense, by moving it more to the visible exchange-traded model, yes, you're going to cure what certain regulators perceived as too opaque a market. But I would say I'm pretty much in agreement with Wolfgang that no amount of regulation is ever going to stop basically what is human nature. And from having been a trader, I think there is a deep knee-jerk reaction that if you get in trouble, to double up. And and there may be ways, that those position limits are supposed to kick in, but somebody with that initial knee-jerk problem, might do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do, and then a few weeks later, a few months later, there's a big problem.
Alexander.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think to use your expression, Ahmed, I think the crooks always stay ahead of the game, and I think it's one of the sort of features of, I suppose, human nature that whatever regulatory system you put in place, those people who are absolutely dedicated to getting round whatever you put in place will do so. What I would say, I think, is that just in the same way as banks always find fantastic ways of losing money, market abuse will continue. I have no doubt that also the authorities will carry on catching people. And I think that's true in the United States, and I think it's also true in the UK, where the FSA in particular has been much stricter. I think one of the things we haven't talked about today is if I may prolong this aspect, are the revisions to the market abuse insider trading directive, again following the pattern that we've seen, both a regulation to replace the existing directive and an amending directive. But I think one of the big gaps here, whilst we've talked a lot about the US and the UK, is that really, frankly, the lack of enforcement in the rest of Europe. Whenever do you hear of an insider trading case in the rest of Europe? And some of the things that the Commission have put in the amending directive and regulation on insider trading, like sort of criminal sanctions, etc., will certainly help perhaps in this respect.